Welcome to another episode of Andy's Chomping at the Bit. Week is almost over, so with that, today's subject I've decided is going to be extreme thinking. Um, I was going to do something more particular to just recovery, um, but um, I feel that the extreme thinking in society, not strictly a politics thing. It's literally across the board. I'll explain it here. Um, I think it's becoming um, quite dangerous as far as for our mental and physical safety. I think it's getting worse. It's getting progressively more and more destructive. Like I said, it does not just go into the world of politics, which we are already at some point aware of in some way or another, um, but in every aspect. So I'm not going to address politics on the first part, and in fact, I'm not going to really address politics at all as far as individuals or individual parties, because this is, whether you want to hear it or not, it's a thing across all parties. It's a thing across all divided groups. It's a way of thinking, not just a certain uh, viewpoint politically or whatever. Um, so a good example of this would be, um, being from Michigan and a big college athletics fan. Michigan State comes to mind with with the extreme thinking. And like I said, you can take this example and move it towards the political side. Last year in football, uh, early in football, Michigan State, the team I cheer for, uh, they they ended up firing their coach Mel Tucker shortly after it came out publicly that um, he had done some inappropriate things with a woman that had been a sexual assault survivor that was speaking to the football team over the last couple years, um, and and so the debate that people were having, I remember as Michigan State fans, a lot of people were jumping to jumping to his defense early on. Um, I heard everything from people going off saying that she's making it up to, oh, there's conspiracy. Even I was partially guilty for a while because you're hit with that shock that maybe Michigan's behind it. They weren't, and and so the argument of, first of all, there was a separate argument that's much more of a legal issue as far as between whether it was what was going on was consensual or not. That I'm not discussing that part right now. That is completely their own thing. I'm just talking about the MSU Michigan example for extreme thinking. Okay, so it took a while, and a lot of fans, myself included, at first were hesitant to to accept reality. Um, but the reality is, what he did, that he admitted doing already, um, was inappropriate. You can't do certain things while in your office on work hours, especially when you're a role model for a bunch of young men. You know, so so I had to learn to accept and swallow that and own up to it. Um, the hard part about it, though, is, and this is why a lot of, I believe, MSU fans also struggled with it, that were engaged in the whole discussion. Um, the former issue Michigan State had with the whole Larry Nasser thing. Um, it's definitely a scar, a very deep scar that runs through, because the guy was pretty sick, disgusting, and well, needless to say, it's hope he has the worst time in prison kind of thing. Um, but but a lot of people didn't want to admit the thing with Tucker and anything wrong there because they knew that Michigan fans were waiting for the opportunity to rub our nose in it, say, "I told you so," and go off on a tangent of, "Well, this is what's wrong with you guys," um, and so a lot of people defended blindly. Um, on the other foot, still sticking with that, Michigan had an issue with and this is going to get debated, and it's not up for debate whether it happened or not. What's up for debate is what the penalty should be. That's essentially based on um, the part I'm going on. I can go based on stuff later in the season, but Michigan had a situation with recruiting violations and with their coach at the time not admitting uh, or denying that he was trying to cover up the thing. They got in trouble for that, or the coach did particularly, um, for trying to cover up wrongdoing that he knew was wrong. But just like Michigan State fans didn't want to say anything because they knew that Michigan fans were waiting to rub their nose in it. It's my hunch on this side that Michigan fans were going the same way. Of course, they have to worry about Ohio State fans as well, rubbing in on them. Um, but the reason I bring that up is because no group is above another group. So if you go to the politics side, no party is free of corruption. I hate to tell you. I'm not saying everyone in those parties are corrupt. That's definitely not true. There's good people on both sides. There's corrupt, bad people on both sides in both low and high power situations. It's just the reality of it. What I bring this up for is how we handle it and the cause of it. So first I'll go with handling it. We need to stop the whole pointing the finger when things don't line up our way. Um, we always say it's the other group's fault. Well, yeah, we have a corrupt people, but they have more. Or yeah, what we did was, that wasn't the greatest thing we did, but they've done worse. It's the whole battle of who's done worse or who's um, more of a problem doesn't solve the problem. If you really want to get to the problem, instead of being like little kids, and this is our society as a whole, and I'm guilty of it too, especially in the past. I'm working on it. Uh, but if we're pointing fingers the whole time, instead of dealing with our own internal issues, with our own groups, with our own whatever across the board teams, our own self, if we're too busy pointing finger and saying, well, they got to change first, they got to do more, well, lead by example, for crying out loud. Just saying it's not going to do anything. As long as you still have issues on your side, talking won't make a difference. And odds are, you got to face that we don't have the ability to control other people. What other people do, what other people say, we don't have control over it. What we do have some control over is influence, through various ways. The productive one is leading by example. If you're going to say it, do your best to do it. Don't try acting like you're perfect, because let's face it, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, nobody here is perfect. So instead of pointing the finger and saying, well, they lie more or they're more corrupt, just deal with your own stuff first. You can't accuse someone of being bad or worse than you if you're not getting your own problems together. And it's starting to get sickening. And another problem with extreme thinking is this mentality of that is creating a very black and white across all arguments. And I don't mean that in the sense of race, black and white. I mean, either you agree with us or you're automatically the enemy. You're for the other side. And this example here I'm going to tell you is not meant as a political example. It's just literally showing you both sides as an example. So let's go with the conflict in Gaza, right? So if you side with Israel, as far as going into Gaza, you're gonna, people will, even if your purpose is because you want to get Hamas, for what they did. Okay, so those that are opposed to that will argue that going in is essentially that you're killing thousands of innocent people, mostly women and children, unfortunately, and that's their argument that way. But the problem is both sides are twisting the viewpoint of the other. So if you're backing Israel in going into Gaza, people are saying, well, in that case, you're backing, you're you must hate Muslims. You must be, you have something against them, whatever they, you know. The other side, if you all of a sudden are against Israel as far as the invasion, the exact the exact other side will flip it, and they won't simply say, well, they'll twist and say that either you're anti-Semitic, or they'll say um, that you're backing terrorists, Hamas, and neither side is necessarily correct. Sure, there's some people that are the polar opposite, yeah, but a lot of people aren't. There's a lot of people out there that are both against what Hamas did, condemn it completely. It was horrible what they did. But at the same time, they condemn what Israel is doing now as far as invading. And it's not, by taking that stance, it doesn't make you against all Muslims because you are against Hamas. It doesn't make you against all Jews because you're against Israel. Israel is a government. Uh, Hamas was a governing body, also recognized as a terrorist group, depending on who you speak to. And they are, in my mind, a terrorist group. But nonetheless, they are not all of the Palestinian people, just like Israel does not represent the entire world's Jewish population. In fact, I'd argue, based on the protests I've seen, they don't even represent their entire population as a whole, period. So that was just an example. Not going to get into what side's what. It's just a classic example of, if you're not for us, you're against us. If you don't believe exactly what we believe, you're the enemy. You see it across, politics is the thickest, but like I said, you see it in every aspect, from sports to, you know, everyday things in life. So I'm trying to think of a good example. So say I wanted say I wanted someone, I put up a boundary for someone. Let's give this as an example. I set a boundary saying, that I don't want person A to, say I don't want them to monitor my calls or something, something simple. And person A responds when they hear that to, oh, so you don't want me in your life. Just an example. And this is probably a somewhat extreme example, but if you actually pull yourself back away from everything and observe, it's actually a very common example. So that's the polar example. Setting a this is not okay, and someone blowing it out and saying, oh, so I can't do anything. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. And it's not just in the U.S., though it is heavily, heavily common in the U.S., because most things we have are based on two. And we have primarily a two-party system. So if you're not for this, they assume you're on the other side. Anyway, but the media is pushing it. I don't know if they're deliberately. I'm not going to go into that argument. But it's creating that divide, and I'm going to already correct you right now if you're one of the people that says, well, that's the other party that's creating the division. Our party's creating unity. Any party that says they're looking to create unity, but then they follow up with, but the other party's stopping us. They're not creating unity. They're literally saying it's us against them. We're the good guys, they're enemies. And that's toxic. That's not healthy, for one. It's not what politics is supposed to be like. It's not what conversation is supposed to be like. And it's not a good example. And this is adults here. Put it this way. If you have kids, or in some cases grandkids, whether they're 2 or 20, it doesn't matter. What kind of example are you setting for them when you are essentially saying, okay, I know I have this problem, but they did it first, or I'm not going to change until they do something. What kind of example are you setting? And like I said, I'm guilty of it too in the past, and I'm still guilty of it sometimes now. It's one of those things I'm actively working on, and it's one of those things that I'm going to have to continue actively working on. Everyone is not something that you can just flip a switch and all of a sudden all of a sudden it's not a problem. You're not going to wake up and be like, okay, I'm no longer going to be this way. It's been drilled into you so long. It's been programmed into us, all of us, so long. It doesn't just flip off. You have to consciously make an effort to do it. And it's not even when you're making a conscious effort to do it, it's still not easy. We still slip and go to that a little bit. You have to keep working on it. And whether things will change from this, probably not realistically. Because, like I said, I don't have control over what other people believe. I don't have control over what other people say, what they do, how they feel. What I do have control over, though, is speaking and calling out the problem. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm calling out the problem the best way I can without getting into the pointing fingers politics of whatever it is that's behind it. Because it's not getting any better doing that. And so by doing this, there's always a hope that I might somehow, from doing this, influence someone or influence enough someone's to create the conversation of change, to create some kind of awareness of this pattern, this trend that's happening, and the us versus them. I get it. Competitive is good, but also understanding how to communicate with class, how to have discussions, healthy discussions, how to accept that people are different. They're not all going to have the same viewpoints as me. In fact, there's probably some people right now that are watching this and like, man, I can't wait till forming up their rebuttal or their comments to trash it. And that's fine. That you have your right to do that. That's respected difference. But we've got to change. It's not gonna. Things aren't gonna get better the way they're going. They're not gonna stay the same either. They're getting worse. They're gonna continue getting worse if we don't make the effort to change. So finding the root is the other part that I was getting at, and the root of it, part of it is competitive. But I also think, like I said earlier, the mentality of, I guess I could do a whole thing on sportsmanship, how it affects actual life. Because we don't want to be wrong. We have that mentality, us versus them, the warrior mentality, however you want to call it. It's not survival of the fittest. If you want to think that, you can think that. The most successful creatures in nature are the ones that hunt in packs anyway, so it's not survival of the fittest. But yeah, it's the way we approach argument. It's the lack of openness. We don't have to agree with people. There's a lot of things that I disagree with my own family. Sometimes I say it, sometimes I don't. But we need to have open dialogue on it. We need to have discussion on this toxic pattern that we've developed in our society. There's people on both sides of the aisle as far as the politics go that I agree with. I don't agree with all their policies. In fact, I won't go into politics still, but there's certain people that I can hardly agree with any of their policies. But as long as they're being peaceful about it, as long as they're not villainizing the other side just for having a disagreement on opinion, I at least respect them. And that's where it is. That it's the lack of respect. It's the my way or the highway. There's no other way. It's been drilled into people so long, I think, and it is becoming to the point where people are. I don't know. I guess people are getting fed up of negotiating. They're getting fed up with finding gray areas, finding compromise, finding areas where we can get along, where you can get some of what you want, but not all of it. The working things out is like people forgot how to do that, or some of them never learned to begin with. It's got to change. Right now, I have slight hope that things will improve in the future as far as our society, and hopefully enough people recognize this issue that we're having and can wake up. But it's a very dangerous path if we don't change. And I'm not, like I said, it's not just a politics thing. It's across the board. And like I said, I'm guilty of it too. In the sense, I'll give you an example where I'm horribly guilty at it, and it'll go right to sports. Michigan State. Um, One, I trash talk all the time, and that's probably not the healthiest thing, because I know it does hurt people's feelings. So let me just put it out there right now: when I'm doing the trash talking against Michigan, because it's almost always against Michigan, um, it's not a slap at anyone, or it's not intended to be a slap at anyone who went to University of Michigan. It's not anything directly at the university, though it is somewhat at the athletics, because it is, that's what it is. It's around sports. I do have tremendous respect for University of Michigan as far as academics, as with all Big Ten schools. Actually, in the state of Michigan, I don't think there's a public university that I don't have respect for. So that's saying a lot. Um, but athletically, it's a rivalry. There's some trash talk beforehand, and in the past I did it afterwards too, and that's something that's uncalled for. Um, but that's just it. It's not supposed to be personal. And after the game, win or lose, that's where class has got to come back. The trash talk's great before. It's great. It's okay during. People get a little more heated, but afterwards, it's done. It's over. You can boast here and there, but you take it down a notch. And I wasn't always able to do that. In 2016, after the Michigan State game, which, for those that remember, it was at Michigan State. Michigan State lost. But after that game, I remember walking out, and I was upset. I wasn't really upset at much at Michigan as I was upset at uh, as I was disappointed at Michigan State. But I remember there was a Michigan fan. A lot of them were, taunting, which is, common. This, like I said, it's not the way it should be, but it is part of how rivalries work. But when I was leaving, there was a guy outside the stadium who got in up close to me, and he wouldn't walk away. He wouldn't even let me walk. I was trying to walk around him, and he said something. I actually didn't hear what he said, but whatever he said, it was enough to make some of the spit of from his mouth fly out and hit me while he was talking, and that was enough to send me over the edge. And I allegedly punched him for it, and I wasn't thinking. It was just caught up in the moment. It was the taking the game more than it actually is, us versus them, really creating a good guys versus bad guys enemy thing, and that's dangerous because, like I said, I hit the guy, and right afterwards I realized there's the police right outside the stadium, and they're looking right at me, and fortunately for my legal sake, for allegedly hitting the guy, another person did the same thing to someone else and the exact same result, and so they went down to that guy instead of me, fortunately. Um, but that was an example where I let something that was intended as fun, competitive nature, and turned it into an actual war, turned it into an actual, dangerous altercation. And that's happening across everything. There's people that won't associate. It's not quite as bad at the sports level yet, but people won't associate with someone who cheers for the opposite team. And it's happening in politics. There's people that won't be friends with the Democrat because they're Republican. They won't be friends with the Republican because they're Democrat. This person's against this issue. This person's not. Things like that. Fights are created. People unadd each other on Facebook. I've once again done that too. People that I know are good people. People that were raised by great families. And because there was a political difference and it bothered me on that day, I unfriended them. Now, don't get me wrong. There's people where if you're posting political stuff and you're posting violent rhetoric and threats, well, then by all means, I'm going to unadd you, but not because of the traditional disagreement in political view. It's going to be because I don't want to be associated with any kind of extreme behavior that might result from such posts. And that this is going to be the final thing when we do create what kind of fuels the fire. We there's so many people that will go on social media and they love to share the latest of news that they have that supports their candidate, their political view, whatever it may be. Half of the time, neither party takes the time to really thoroughly check their source. It sounds believable to them, so it must be true, and they post it. And even if it is true, that's not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is when we post something on Facebook, if you're being honest with yourself, you're not doing it to convince someone and talk someone into who's on the fence to changing. You're doing it to really slap the other person who has not an opposing view, to kind of you want to basically metaphorically you're stabbing them essentially to try claiming victory, like, haha, I won this argument, I'm right, you're wrong. And and I think that is the problem. We're not engaging in these discussions to find common ground. We're engaging in these discussions because we want to be victorious. We want to see the other person look bad because we won the argument and they lost. You know, it's gone too far. So I know I went a little long on this one. It's something that's been really eating me up because I could have a great day and then I turn on the news and it doesn't even have to be within my house, but there's a discussion somewhere, whether it be in the community or online, or even if they have a panel on TV, and it just gets so negative, so toxic, and unnecessarily negative and toxic. There's nothing at this point. I've had this same argument with my dad on a political issue over and over again, and there's not a darn thing that he can say that's going to change my viewpoint on the matter, and vice versa. It's just how it is. It's one of those issues where we share the same facts, but we value certain aspects differently. And so we'll get into heated arguments, and because I won't support who he supports, I'm automatically for the other person, or I'm automatically trying to destroy the country or whatever. And that's not the case. The reality is most people on both sides want to do well for the country. They have different beliefs on how that will happen. They have different beliefs on the outcome of how the other person wants to take it. That doesn't make everyone on the other side bad. It doesn't make everyone on the other side want to destroy the country, want to destroy the world. It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them anything other than having a different viewpoint to help the country. Okay? Just want to say that. Yes, there are people extreme on both sides that do want to do bad things, but guess what? That's a very small part of them. Just remember that. In media, the reality is blood sells, and guess what really draws headlines? So keep that in mind. Anyway, I hope I didn't kill too much of your day. So this is once again Andy's Chomping at the Bit, brought to you by Big Andy Media. If you haven't had the chance, you can follow Big Andy Media on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and soon you'll be able to go to, and LinkedIn, I forgot LinkedIn, and bigandymedia.com will be officially up and going, hopefully within the week or two. So stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys more on Monday and Wednesday's Daily Biscuits. Take care.